folks. My name is Garrett Oliver, and I am the Brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery since 1994, so I've been around for a little while. I want to thank our good friends at Total Wine for inviting me here today to do this with you. I'm, of course, sitting here in my living room in Brooklyn, as we are all sitting a lot more around our living rooms, but you know, beer is making things a little bit easier, so we're happy to bring some to you. We are going to kind of do a little bit of a loop today. We're going to start off with some things that are relatively new and a bit exciting for us, then kind of go back to our beginnings with Brooklyn Lager, and then loop through some things that we've been up to a little bit more lately and are going to lead us into our summertime, which, though it doesn't seem like it right now, here there's snow on the ground, we'll be here before we know it. Let's get started. I don't know what time it is for you guys. Right now it is morning time for me, which makes this next beer work out great. Now, I have to admit to you, when we first talked about that we were going to do a non-alcoholic beer, I said to myself, those are all terrible. Like, you know, I'm a brewmaster. I like to make beer with alcohol, which I believe in, and, you know, in moderation is very good for you. And I didn't see the point of a non-alcoholic beer. And we looked at it harder, and I thought about it, and I said, but what a cool challenge, because no one's really done this well before. And so we kind of started getting into it. And it really is fascinating. You know, there's only a couple of main ways to make a non-alcoholic beer. There are several, but there are two basic ways. When yeast ferments sugars, it tries to make alcohol. You either have to stop it from making alcohol. This can be done with various types of temperature control, yeast control, etc. Or you make a beer with alcohol and then you remove the alcohol. And there's two ways of doing that. You could either boil the beer in a vacuum. When the pressure drops, the alcohol will boil at a much lower temperature and will come out of solution and evaporate. The other way of doing it is by passing it through an osmotic membrane that leaves the alcohol on one side and lets the rest of the beer come through. We have gone with the first method, which is referred to in the industry as limit fermentation. So by very, very carefully controlling the way the yeast interacts with the sugar, we get the yeast basically not to produce the alcohol, but to give us the flavors of beer. So this is called Special Effects. Special Effects is our line of non-alcoholic beers. This is the first one of this series, which is a hoppy lager. And the fascinating thing about it, when we started off this project, we would just put some glasses of this beer down on the counter in our bar. And we said to people, hey, this is a new beer that we've got. Would you like to try it? And they said, sure. And we gave it to them. And everybody just said, wow, that's really good. I'd like to get some of that. Where is it? Nobody ever noticed that it was non-alcoholic. And that's where we knew we had something. So even now, when I know exactly what's going on in this glass, I know exactly how this beer is made, it just tastes like a beer to me. It's got some great caramel flavors. It has a very nice light hop-driven aroma. It has an appetizing bite to it. And here's the thing, you know, I didn't do dry January. I wasn't really thinking in terms of I'm always looking to keep things pretty mellow. But I wasn't trying to do anything different. What really got me was trying to basically do more stuff during my day. I would come downstairs from the office and see the guys at the bar and all my brewing team, and they'd say, Garrett, come have a pint. And I'd be on my way to the gym. And I can't have a pint and then go to the gym. It's just not gonna work. But with special effects, I could actually go to the bar, have the pint, and then go to the gym. This really changed things for me personally. These days, with what's going on in the world, I'm spending more time at home, like a lot of us are. And when I'm at home and I'm eating a sandwich for lunch, basically, I've got a lot to do with the rest of the day. I can't afford to be drinking a beer in the middle of the day and slowing myself down. But I don't really want, say, a soft drink with my sandwich if I can help it. And I can help it now because I've got special effects. So I am going through so much of this next beer, which is the new one in the special effects line, which is Special Effects IPA. I gotta tell you, I'm drinking this every day. In the middle of the day, I used to take a squeeze of maybe some fruit juice and some seltzer water and a little dash of sugar and maybe make a light lemonade. I don't like really sugary soft drinks, so I wasn't doing that. So there always had to be something to go with lunch, and trying to figure out what am I gonna do with lunch instead of water was always really difficult. And now, special effects is the obvious answer with what to do for lunch. Yesterday I had some Nepalese dumplings in a spicy chili sauce. I don't know why I'm getting cling on this glass. I just cleaned these glasses, but anyway, the glasses are clean. And that smells amazing. It's got a great big, almost grapefruity hop aroma. A beautiful hop bite. And it's just super light and refreshing. It's low in calories. It's kind of got everything that you want in an IPA without the alcohol. Now we're going more for the kind of old school West Coast style than the kind of modern, hazy, juicy style here. But basically, it's an IPA with 0.5% alcohol that tastes like IPA. And that's great, especially spicy foods, stuff like that, or just your ham and cheese sandwich, pizza, whatever you like. It's just really a great pairing. And I just love the fact that I can sit here, at 11 o'clock in the morning and drink this. There's no problem. I don't know, it's weird, but it totally works for me. And I'm loving it. And here I was like, oh, I don't want to drink anything like that. And now it's kind of, yeah, every day. We're gonna go back to the beginning of Brooklyn Brewery. Now, if you were in a place like New York in the late 1800s, what you would have seen was actually the most diverse and interesting beer culture in the whole world. This may be difficult to believe. You might think, well, certainly England or Germany or Belgium had the most interesting beer culture in the world, but no, because we actually had the beers from all those other places. We were importing huge amounts of beer from Germany, huge amounts of beer from the UK. We were brewing in various styles. We had 48 breweries in Brooklyn alone. And those 48 breweries made 15% of all the beer in the United States. Brooklyn was one of the great brewing centers of the whole world. And so things were pretty exciting back in those days when it came to beer. We now think of American beer historically as having been boring, but that's not true. There were so many IPA breweries in New York City that there was a New York Burtonizing company that basically helped you make water for your brewing, like Burton-on-Trent in England. All they did was sell brewing salts to the brewing industry to make IPA. There were breweries that made nothing but Weiss beer, and there were lager specialists. Now, one of the things the lager specialists were making was the new popular Viennese style of beer, the Vienna lager. Vienna lager was invented by Gabriel Sedlmayr in 1840. only 2 years before Pilsner was invented in Czech Bohemia at Prazdroj. And this beer was one of the first ones to come out that had just a full amber color. Almost all the beers you saw before then were dark. And at this point, we were going from a British-based beer culture in the United States. Obviously, we had been a British colony. To a more German-based beer culture. Why? Well, we had massive German immigration into the United States in those days. Most major American cities had huge German-speaking populations. And at the time that they left, what was the most popular beer style? The Vienna Lager was the stylish beer of the day. It was lighter in color than the beers that people had seen before, like Dunkel, and therefore it was considered stylish. You guys will have a can. I'm rocking it old school here with a bottle. But Brooklyn Lager was introduced in 1988. And in those days, Brooklyn Lager was considered a really weird beer. No one had ever seen a beer this color before. You have to remember, this is the old days. So you're talking about 1988. Beer was supposed to be yellow, fizzy, and relatively flavorless. If you were lucky, it was flavorless. The stuff that I drank in college had a flavor, and it wasn't good. So when people saw this color, they said, what's wrong with it? And we said, well, we've added caramel malts to give you this nice caramel flavor and a richness and a nutty character. And they smelled it, and they're like, what's that? It's like, well, it's 100% malt. And on top of it, we've dry hopped the beer, adding hops after fermentation to give you extra flavor and aroma. And then people would basically tell us to get out because they had no idea what this beer could possibly taste like, but it looked weird and they didn't want anything to do with it. Well, eventually, everything started to go our way. People started tasting the beer and they started loving the beer and saying, hey, this stuff is really good. And I can still remember the days when it was difficult to find craft beer. I would buy Brooklyn Lager and literally bring it to a party to make sure that I would have something to drink. And when I was not feeling charitable, when I got to the party, I would put the Brooklyn Lager under the bed. I know that makes me a bad person, but I needed to have something to drink, and something to drink was tough to find. In those days, Brooklyn Lager was pretty rare. Today, it is ubiquitous. You might not know this, but Brooklyn sells beer in 35 countries, and you can easily find Brooklyn Lager in Stockholm and in Paris and in many of the great capitals of the world. And so Brooklyn Lager has become kind of part of the face of America to a lot of the rest of the world, which is kind of ironic since style-wise, it kind of comes from a Viennese background, this nice, rich, full malt character, but is kind of racy like a Pilsner. And then on top of it is dry hopped, which is something that we usually associate more with IPAs than we do with lagers. And so it is an American hybrid, which is one of the things that, of course, Americans do best. We take our influences from various places all over the world, and then we put them together to make something that is uniquely American. What is fun about Brooklyn Lager is that when people taste it for the first time, if they are not already familiar with it, they're often surprised. You know, they will have expected that this is a beer they see everywhere, that they already know it, and they think they know what it's going to taste like, but they're like, wow, this beer is kind of big. It's got a lot going on. Like, yeah, that's one of the things that will keep you interested in your pint over the course of the evening. I kind of think of what I call the 4-pint principle, which is that when you drink a Brooklyn Lager, I want you to want, secretly, in the back of your mind, I want you to want 4 pints. Even if you're not going to drink 4 pints, it's kind of a lot. But if you don't think you could drink 4 pints at some point, that beer probably isn't really good enough. And I think the 4 pint principle totally applies to Brooklyn Lager, which is one reason why it's such a huge favorite to this day. All right, so we're going to move a little bit up here to modern times, and this is a beer you may not have seen yet. This is a new beer from us. This is called Pulp Art, and this is a hazy, juicy IPA in kind of the modern style. I've been around brewing beer for a long, long time. I like to joke with the younger kids that I'm like 400 years old. Back in the days when a poster like this would have first come out, IPA was a very particular style. It was 6.5%. It was served bright and clear. It had a particular kind of hop aroma. And over these years, as Americans have brought IPA back, it has gone through a few different versions. The old British version, then you kind of had the West Coast version, which became very popular for a while. And now we have the hazy version. Now, what makes it hazy? There are a few things. We do some things with the mash, temperatures, etc., but also a very large amount of oats, which give you not only some of that hazy appearance, but also a very rich, round sort of texture, mouthfeel, as we say in the business. Now, let's get this going. It has a different pour to it. It almost pours like motor oil, in a certain way. Beautiful foam. We've got our haze going on, and then as soon as you get your nose to the glass, that aroma kind of jumps out at you. And that's partially driven by the dry hopping, yes, but also driven by the yeast. Now, the yeast that we're using here is an old British strain that gives you all these fruity flavors and aromas, and then we do the dry hopping on top of that to accentuate all of that. Bitter, but also a little bit of sweetness, palate fullness, very clean, a mineral edge to it, and an almost tropical sort of character. I'm getting a little bit of mango and tangerines. This is a great beer style to have with spicy food. I think if I'm, eating Thai food or something along those lines, Sichuan Chinese, where you often see a lot of chilies, this is a beer that's really going to be able to stand up to that type of cuisine. But it remains dry enough to be refreshing, which is important. You don't want a beer to start getting so sweet that it becomes cloying on the palate. So making beers like this always involve a certain type of balance, trying to get that fruity, juicy character going on, but not overdoing it so that the beer builds up on your palate. And Pulp Art, I think, is a really nice balance between those two poles. And finally, as we come here to the end, one of my favorite beers that we've put out in the last 5 years or so. When we started working on a sour beer, well, I'll go back. We had done some sour beers before, but they had always been barrel-aged specialties. And then we started getting into looking at what people these days call a kettle sour or a simple sour, where the beer does not achieve its acidity over a long period of time, but where you actually acidify the wort before the main fermentation. And some people used to look down on this style of beer because it didn't take forever, and it wasn't always the most complex thing in the world, but when made well, it could be really super refreshing, and it is traditional because the Berliner Weiss style out of Germany was often made by this method going back to the 1700s and 1800s. So, how do we make it sour? Basically, the same way that you make sauerkraut or yogurt sour, we use lactic acid bacteria. We have our own strain, which actually we found at the brewery, and we tried a lot of strains. It took us 2.5 years to develop this beer. And here's the thing. I'm not talking, I've had some really nice sour beers. I've also had a lot of really bad sour beers. I mean, I'm sorry, that's just the truth. And when you often would talk to people, they would say, oh, I don't really like sour beer. And then when they got Bel Air, you would see their reaction, which was really different. Before Bel Air even came out, we had a nickname for it around the brewery, which was Happy Juice, because it seemed almost impossible to be sad when you were drinking a glass of Bel Air. It just tasted so nice and so bright and so happy. So you stick your nose in there and you kind of get this bright pineapple kind of character. Already puts you in the mood for something good to be happening. Now, most people, when they taste it the first time, you might get a wince. They literally go, and then they would get about halfway down the glass and they'd be like, And by the time they got this far down the glass, they'd be, hey. And I can't tell you how many people I have seen say that they didn't like sour beer, get Bel Air at our bar, and then the look on their face when they actually realize that they are about to order their second pint of sour beer is actually really funny. Because the thing is, sour beer, when it's made well, tastes really great. Think about it. There used to be a whole sour wing of beer in the first place. There were bitter beers and sour beers, the same way that there are sour cocktails based usually on lemon or lime juice, and there are bitter cocktails based on bitters. In the world of wine, you have acidity driving white wine, and you have tannin, a type of bitterness, driving red wine. Well, the same was true of beer. You had acidic beers, and you had bitter beers. But in the 1900s, we kind of lost track of the whole acidic wing of beer. But we love acidic drinks. You start with lemonade when you're a kid, and then you move your way up. Maybe when you go to college, you're drinking margaritas. Maybe eventually you move on to white wine and champagne, but you drink acidic drinks your entire life. So why shouldn't an acidic beer not be good? Well, some people like a beer that will take the enamel off your teeth. I personally love traditional, really funky lambics, but probably not 4 pints. The 4-pint principle entirely applies to Bel Air. In fact, when I start drinking Bel Air, I'm probably going to drink Bel Air for the rest of that particular evening. It just kind of keeps going. I can drink it in a backyard barbecue, on a fishing boat, whatever. It's great with salads, it's great with seafood, it's great with a lot of different types of cuisine that might be otherwise hard to find good pairings for. You have this with some salmon, it's awesome. And we acidify the wort over about 36 hours in our own special tanks. It's not actually done in the kettle. And then we transfer it into fermenter. We go through a full regular fermentation with a regular yeast strain, the same strains that we ferment other beers with, and then we dry hop the beer. And so you have this just great tropicality of flavor and kind of an acidic backbone as opposed to a bitter backbone. It just gives you the ability to do so many other things. Now, should you feel like doing this, you can actually make great cocktails out of it. I've never really been into beer, cocktails, micheladas, whatever else. If you love them, great. Not really the thing for me. But Bel Air with some rum and a little bit of sugar on ice, I gotta tell you, it's really good. Bel Air with a splash of Aperol, like an Aperol Spritz on ice, really good. I know Brewmaster is talking to you about putting stuff and ice in your beer, but I am giving you a benediction that you can actually do this, because beer is for drinking, not for worshiping or having difficulties about. Bel Air, the reason why it's called Bel Air is because it gives you that happy feeling where you don't have difficulties, you have beer. So thank you so much for coming along for this tasting. I'm glad you were able to spend some time with us. And hopefully when things are a little bit normal, again, you can visit us at Brooklyn Brewery in Brooklyn. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you. Cheers.